Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Emergency Preparedness for People with Hearing Loss. First, I would like to thank Lisa Johnston for providing CART this evening. Thank you very much, Lisa. We really appreciate it. Tonight we have Lisa Hamlin, HLAA Director of Public Policy, here with us tonight, and also Scott Smith. Scott may be familiar to some of you who have attended our conventions in the past. Scott comes along with his med tech bag and ready to help anybody who might be injured or need medical assistance on site. But his bigger role probably is as a technical support for the CART captioning team led by his wife, Deanna Baker. So he's a huge help to us at convention. We always really appreciate his help. Lisa and Scott have a lot of good information to share tonight, and so I'm going to go ahead and let them get started.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nancy, for the introduction, and hello, everybody. I hope you enjoy our presentation. And feel free to, Nancy didn't discuss this, but what you'll want to do for questions is put them in the chat room, and then Nancy will read them at the end. But feel free to pop in your question when you're ready, and she'll keep track of that, okay? As Nancy said, I'm Lisa Hamlin. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Hearing Loss Association of America. I've been at HLAA for 9 years now, this April actually. I've had a hearing loss for about 30 years, and I've been in the field for 25. And I've had an interest in emergency preparedness for a long time now. I worked at NVRC working with first responders and people with hearing loss, training them on how to work with each other. In fact, letting consumers learn how to work with emergency preparation folks, both the managers and the frontline people, and also having frontline people understand what it meant to work with somebody with hearing loss. So I also, before we really get going on the slides, I'd like to introduce Scott. And Scott, would you tell people a little bit about your background as well?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, as Nancy stated, my wife Deanna is the one that got me involved with the conventions and HLAA back when it was called SHUSH. This coming up year, I think, will be my 18th or 19th convention. I have a background in computer science, in IT provisioning, which I am currently doing right now for the hospital here in Flagstaff. I also have a 20-year career as a firefighter and paramedic. And that pretty much sums that up for me. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. So let's get started here. Why are we talking about emergencies? Scott and I have done this before. You can see from this slide, emergencies is something, and from Scott's background, emergencies are something that really impacts all of us. They happen anytime and anywhere. And I have to say, I update this slide. As I said, Scott and I do this at the convention often, and I update the slides, and each year it's easy to find another emergency. So it is important, no matter where you live, to be prepared for emergencies. So how do you learn about emergencies? How does somebody with hearing loss know? Well, one of the ways we learn is television. We can get information from the internet. We can get text alerts, and don't forget your friends and family. Remember that you may not always have your television on or be looking at the internet or even get a text alert. You may be away from your phone. But friends and families can always let you know what's going on. So don't forget that. Now, one of the reasons we use TV is because emergency managers still rely on TV almost to exclusion of, not to the exclusion of everything else. We know that they can use text, we know they use Facebook, and we know that they reach out, but when an actual emergency happens, it's the quickest and easiest way to get a hold of many people at the same time. So what the FCC says is that for emergency information, it must be visual as well as audible. There must be, everything that's said must have a crawl or a graphic or captioning. And in the top 25 markets that are supposed to provide news that have captions, those emergency alerts must also be captioned. If you're outside those markets, again, you don't have to do it captioned. It doesn't have to be real time. But it must be visual. There must be a crawl or so. They could even use a whiteboard if they needed to. But it's got to parallel what everybody said, what's being said. And if that doesn't happen, the FCC takes it very seriously. So you should always feel free to complain about this or actually anything that you feel that should happen on television, the information you should be getting by captions. So that's a link to it. This webinar will be archived, so you can get the link again. I know links are difficult to write down on the fly here, so you will be able to get to this again. Or you can go to the FCC's website. You can simply Google it, where it will say Google Consumer Complaints, and you'll find the page. Now, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, which we call CVAA, also requires captioning of video programming shown on television to be captioned when it's viewed online. So anything that was first captioned on TV, as it goes, even as it's going live on the internet, should be captioned. So you should be able to get your internet captioned, emergency information captioned also. It's not a guarantee. In an emergency, again, sometimes things don't always work right, but you should be able to get it. The other thing that happened with CVAA was that it required that screens smaller than 13 inches must be caption capable. So that means those smartphones that you have can get the captions if you need them in an emergency. And you can find out more about CVAA on the FCC's website as well. Local television news alerts. Sometimes you can get, often more and more, you can get something, an app for your iPhone or your Android phone that will provide you alerts directly from the television station. And they will update you regularly on it. And of course you can go to Facebook and you get Twitter feeds. And also breaking news alerts via email. So all of those are now possible that weren't even just a few years ago. The other cool thing that's happened is that wireless emergency alerts are now embedded on your smartphones. Now they have to be a new smartphone if you're hanging on to one for many years now, or if what happened is that you get a lesser phone, it may not have the, and certainly it has to be smartphone. It can't be just a feature phone or a regular or plain cell phone. It's got to be able to get access to the internet. But if those phones have an emergency text that is targeted to your area, but is the national, so it will come from the National Weather Service likely, and it automatically turns on. You don't have to do anything. It'll give you the alert. What you can, if you decide you don't want it, you can turn it off. But I can't imagine why somebody wouldn't want to keep that on. It's just very helpful. What we talk about, and Scott will back me up on this, is that when you're talking about emergency management, you want redundancy because you never know what's going to fail, what won't work quite right. So having your cell phone with this as well as local alerts is always a good idea. Now, text alerts. In my own in Montgomery County, Maryland, I signed up for a text alert. I had to register. I had to tell them, I don't remember because it's so long ago, but I registered my email address, what area I wanted to be alerted, that I know. And that provides, so like what I get here, a lot of what I get in this area is alerts about if there's a traffic accident or if a road isn't working, if a tree falls down. That's pretty frequently what we get, but it's also available, the weather alerts will come through that way too. Here's another possibility, especially if you live in a rural area where you don't get really good broadband access, you're not getting a great signal on your cell phone. You can get an accessible NOAA weather radio. Now what these do is that there's a broad area that is covered by NOAA that has weather signals. And the message from a radio, there's one of the brands that I have a picture of up there. And the signal will turn on automatically. The signal is sent from the local jurisdiction. You set it up for your jurisdiction so you don't get alerts from across the country. But it's very specific and can give things like tornado alerts and hurricane alerts that are really specific to your area, and send it off. Now what this model that I've shown here, and there are a few other models do, is provide the alert visually or with a tactile add-on. But you have to get a specific model. So you should go to if you're interested in this, go to NOAA's website, and they will show which models you can use that will provide you those weather alerts that you need. Remember, it's not an AM or an FM radio. It only gets those alerts. The other thing it does is it gives a really brief text message, so you know what it's about. But the text, if you really can't hear it, the text message is very short. The audible message is a little bit longer, gives you more information. But what it would do also is it tells you, by knowing there's something going on, you then wake up or you're alerted to it, and you then go to another source like your television or a radio or FM radio or even the internet to get real information. Okay, the other thing we want to talk about is an emergency kit. This is something you should have around. You can have it around in your house. I have one in my closet that goes right by my door, so I could pick it up when I leave. You could have a separate one in your car if you had to leave. But the idea is to keep basic things in your kit. So if in an emergency you had to leave in a hurry, or even if you had to stay in your house for any length of time, you know always you'd have some basic stuff available to you whenever you needed it. So first aid is a big one. Food, of course, you want something, and you put things that are non-perishable. But the other thing you want to put in terms of food is you want a treat. If there's an emergency, you want to make sure that you're cool and calm so you can put your candy bar in there and not feel guilty at all about eating it. That goes in your kids. Of course, you want water. And I have to say, this isn't listed in every emergency kit, but I always have TP, toilet paper, in my kit, just in case. You just never know. The other thing I put down, and this is in some kits when you have larger kits, but I always put a little bit of cash, not a fortune by my closet door, but some cash, because you never know if the emergency will knock out your ATM and you just don't have cash that day and you don't have access to credit cards. So it's nice to have just a little bit of cash on hand as well.
Lisa, don't forget any medications as well that you might need. And I believe the current recommendation is three to 5 days worth of supplies from FEMA.
Right. So that's very important. Remember whatever your own needs are. So we can tell you what general needs are, and I'm going to focus here on the communication needs that people with hearing loss have, that we often don't think about, or when emergency managers don't focus on that. They need to focus on everybody when you're talking about what's in the kit. But definitely you should know about medications. You should know about whatever, if you, for example, have a medication like insulin that needs to be refrigerated, what are you going to do about that? Sometimes you can get scripts written in advance. So you could know, so you could have your a stash of your medications in advance with you, and then just rotate it in and out of your kit. That's another thing you want to do. You don't want to keep your food too long, even though it's other than cans. You want to make sure, and especially if you put, well, I guess you could put Twinkies in. They probably last forever. But other than that, you want to make sure you rotate things in and out. Make sure, look at that kit every so often. So But for people with hearing loss, this is one of the things I wanted to focus on here because people don't think about this. Think about, okay, food, water, even TP. But we really need to think about the things that will help us communicate in an emergency. You have to think about what will happen if you ran out of hearing aid batteries. You have to think about if your cochlear implant typically gets plugged in the wall and there's no electricity, what are you going to do? So some of the things we recommend is, for example, having a smartphone. You could text people. Texting works often better than certainly video, that's for sure, because video eats up a lot of bandwidth. But even sometimes you can't get a phone call through, you might be able to text. So having a smartphone around, making sure it's charged regularly, and keep a car charger with it. So if you have to go, you can charge it, or a battery charger. Now, I put down portable TTY. I still have not taken this off the list, again, because you just never know. It may be the only way you can communicate by phone in an emergency. So if you have a TTY that runs on batteries or a charging unit, you should try to keep that along too. Like, don't throw away everything quite yet. Bring a spare. I have in my kit, I have my old hearing aid that I keep in there, and batteries. Again, you want to rotate that out every so often. And if you have a spare CI, that's a good place to store it. Glasses. I always tell people I can hear better when I can actually see better. So a spare pair of glasses is a good idea too. If you have a personal assisted listening device, even a pocket talker, again, in a jam, you might want to be able to use that. And then sometimes an external phone amplifier that you can use with it as well. The other thing we found is portable caption TVs. I put on here, I've kept that on here, but in fact you can use your smartphone, and some of the screens on smartphones are pretty big. You may not need a portable TV if you've got a tablet, a smartphone, or something of that sort. And then I also include a portable radio, because even if you can't hear, chances are your neighbor isn't as prepared as you are. So you can have your hearing neighbor and listen to the radio, and you can get the information. You can both get the information, help each other that way. I also put in glow sticks because flashlights are tough for people with hearing loss. Shining the harsh light is difficult. You could put a flashlight that works for you, but you might also think about having a glow stick or something that has a dimmer, more even light. I put in remember your pets because we learned after Katrina that people don't want to leave their pets behind. So make a plan for your pets. Now, we know service dogs can go with you, and now, from what I understand, many, if not most, emergency preparedness shelters will allow a service dog in. So you can check with them, talk to people in your neighborhood, find out what their rules are, and if you're finding that they are opposed, then you can work with them. But for pets are not allowed in shelters. So have an emergency kit for your pet, and think about things in advance. The Humane Society have shelters, friends out of the area you might be able to travel to leave the pet in. Some hotels are pet friendly. Whatever it is, think in advance, what would you do with your pet? Now, we also talked this language used in emergency preparedness. Sheltering in place as opposed to evacuation. I think most people know evacuation is pretty clear, but some people don't really understand what sheltering in place is, so I put it in here. And what we mean when we say that is that you stay where you are. So if there's a tornado or a chemical spill, you don't want to be out on the road. So you get your text message, you say you'll know, and you'll get that information from the emergency managers in your area who will alert you it's time to shelter in place or it's time to evacuate. And pay attention, because they don't give out orders to do either evacuation or sheltering in place lightly. It's really well considered, well thought through in most cases, I would think. And so listen to what the managers are saying. And to help you, you should have at least a quarter of a tank of gas in your car, because you don't want to have to evacuate. You have no gas. You've seen those instances where people ran out of gas and they abandoned their cars on the road when they're trying to evacuate. I think Scott has told us that he keeps a half a tank. So it depends on where you live. Where I live, a quarter of a tank will get me pretty much out of my area. But if you're in the middle of a vast rural area, you might want to keep more in your tank. And some of us do depend on public transportation. I had heard from some people with disabilities during 9/11 that they were at a community college, and they were physically disabled, mobility disabled, and they were dependent on Metro Access, and it was not coming. So if you, in a situation like that, think about, well, what is my backup situation going to be if I'm in an emergency? Did you have anything to add to that, Scott? You should jump in whenever you want. Okay.
Well, the only thing that came up is the cell phone. I know we've grown accustomed to relying on our cell phones quite a bit over the last few years, but in a real emergency such as Katrina, that's going to be one of the first things that you're not going to be able to use. Two different reasons. One, it'll go down, the system will go down pretty quickly with the increase in traffic. Everybody wants to use the cell phone to notify loved ones or to try to get additional information, so they flood the cell phone towers. Second, what will occur in some of the larger events is the emergency agencies will turn the towers off in order to be able to use them for emergency transmissions only, mainly for government agencies' use. So don't rely solely on your cell phone. It may or may not be available to you in an emergency.
I think that sounds like good advice. That's why, again, all technology. I even have an old Ma Bell phone that I keep around. I don't know if I want to schlep it around, but I do have a portable TTY, which is much smaller, and if I have to leave, it gives me a way to get out and still be able to communicate. So think about those kinds of options. Now, we're talking about now what happens when you have to reach 911. So we were talking about larger emergencies, weather emergencies, but what if you have an emergency where you need to reach 911 and you have a hearing loss? Well, in 2014, the FCC adopted rules to implement text to 911 service. Seemed like a no-brainer. My own hearing brother thought that of course you could text 911, can't you? Well, no, not really. Not everywhere, even now. Even though in 2014 the rules went in place, the problem is that there are two pieces. The piece is the cell phone itself, the carrier you're using, and then there's also the public safety answering point. The person who has to receive the message has to be also capable of receiving a text message. We've found since 2014, over 800 jurisdictions have adopted text to 911, but that's not a whole lot. That means there's a lot of people who don't have access to text. So you can try text, but see, there should be a bounce back message, a message that says this is not working in this area. Don't do it. That's particularly, you can know your own area. You can find out if your either city or state has text to 911. But when you're traveling, there's no real way to know. So those bounce back messages are really important. So that's one message. You should know about it, but it's not reliable in every situation. So what else? What else can we do?
According to that list.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. According to that list, there are no jurisdictions in the entire state of Arizona that are capable.
There you go. So there are some small states that picked it up. I'm forgetting which one. It was Vermont or New Hampshire, where it was a little easier to work. But yeah, a big state like Arizona, California has some jurisdictions, certainly not the whole state. You can look up the jurisdiction on the website that I gave you down there under, to find out if your jurisdiction is included. But I wouldn't depend on it. It's difficult to get at this point. Now, the other possibility if you have a hearing loss is to use a relay. Relay providers are required to have a way to connect you to 911. However, it's my experience until things get much, much better, that relay is a poor solution also. The problem is that there is a handoff. So if you call your relay operator, if you pick up and call your relay operator first, that person has to then find the 911 center that's appropriate, wherever you're looking for, and then connect you to that. I was in a test where that took a full 10 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time, but if you're having a heart attack, it's not where you want to be. So my suggestion to anybody is to not use relay, but to use the phone directly, turn off the captions on your caption phone, or if you're used to using video relay, if you can voice to yourself, pick up the phone and say you have an emergency, but you cannot hear. So you won't be able to respond, but tell them the essential information. I'm on the corner of 10th and Main, and there's a car accident, and there are people hurt. But I can't hear to respond. Please send the emergency responders, and they will do that. The only way you can get a direct connect if you have a hearing loss is the TTY. So if you still have that TTY, and that's the major way you want to connect an emergency, make sure you have it already set up someplace, because that still is required in public safety answering points. The public safety folks will answer a TTY call. So that's our situation with RE. It's not the best, but there are possibilities. Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to cover is, before we go to questions, is fire safety. Because with all the emergencies we talk about 9/11, you can talk about Katrina. Those are major disasters, but the chances are less likely than the smaller ones, the things in your home. So you have to think about these things like fire risk. And the reason I really mention it is because people who age into their hearing loss don't think about the fact that their smoke alarm is probably on a frequency they can't hear when they go to sleep. You know, take off your hearing aid, take off your cochlear implant. You can't hear that high frequency anymore. What are you going to do? So even though the first thing I say is that we need working, accessible smoke alarms, and we do, because fires don't happen just at night. They can happen in the daytime when you have a hearing aid on and you can hear them. You should think about other safety measures. So sprinklers are a great way to provide safety, because the sprinkler goes off in the area where the fire takes place. So if the kitchen is on fire, the sprinkler goes off right above it, and it's a whole lot safer than having, if you're for the hearing loss, in my understanding, than worrying about whether you can hear that you left that pot on the stove and it's burning now. So think about sprinklers. The other thing you can think about is that there are different kinds of fire alerts. So if you wake up with a visual alert, or you think a visual alert in the kitchen is a good idea, use that. I, in fact, that saved one of my pots left on the stove one time because the alarm went off. So that was really good for me, but I was awake. There are tactile alerts. There are low frequency alerts. my suggestion for this too is see if you, I know this is hard, but see if you can test them. If you have a friend or a spouse, a child who can set it up and run it off when you're sound asleep and see if it wakes you up, that would be better than waiting to the last minute. And don't forget carbon monoxide. It's something people tend to forget, but we're actually hearing more about this now because some of the cars that are being produced now are quiet. And so for somebody with a hearing loss, they walk out of their car and leave the car running without realizing it. This is not terrible if it's out on the street. It's not great. It's not terrible. Nothing bad should happen. But if you park your car in a garage and you live upstairs from that garage, the amount of carbon monoxide that's produced can be enough to kill you. So the carbon monoxide detector that is accessible, that you can hear or respond to with a tactile or visual or whatever, is also important.
Something I would like to add to that, there are an awful lot of fire alarms out there that combine the two, both smoke and carbon monoxide. I don't have a tendency to recommend those. Smoke will rise with the heat of the fire, so people will have a tendency to mount the smoke detector above their head, along the ceiling, in a hallway, or even on the ceiling. However, they're forgetting that the carbon monoxide portion of that is heavier than air, and it will settle to the floor. So by the time that alarm goes off for carbon monoxide, you'll already have been overcome by the carbon monoxide. So my suggestion would be to get two different, one specifically just for carbon monoxide detection, and mount that lower down along the floor, and then a separate one for the smoke alarm that you can mount at a higher location.
That's a good idea too, something actually I hadn't considered. So I learn something new every time we do this. So just remember it, figure it out, talk to the people who can install them in your home. I would also suggest for people with hearing loss, a wired system would be better than the portable systems. For example, the one I have pictured up there is a plug-in, which again is fine if it's sitting in the room itself. But if you're in a different room, for example, if your kitchen, again, let's say your kitchen is smoking and is on fire, but you're up in your bedroom and you can't see it, that's a problem. So the best systems are to wire them together, spend the time and energy and money it takes to really get it done if you want to be safe. So you can bring a professional in to make sure that they're sitting in the right place and doing what you need it to do. Okay, so I made this fairly short because every time we do this, we have lots of questions. And I can see on the chat room that there are a few. So Nancy, I'm going to rely on you to repeat them out.
Okay.
And we'll go with questions.
Okay, the first question comes from Rosalind, and she's tuning in tonight from Canada. And she asks, are the NOAA weather radios only for the U.S., or may they be used in Canada as well?
The weather radios, you can look on the NOAA website, but this is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, so unless you're living in an area that's on the border with the U.S., I would suspect that it wouldn't work. But I would check their website out to be sure. And Canada might have something similar. I would check that out too. Do you happen to know, Scott, about that? No? Okay.
It is a U.S. agency, U.S. government agency. So they, most of their alerts, they're going to be concerned with just the United States territories as a priority. There may be some overlap up along the border, but I would not expect it to go into very far into Canada.
So if you have the NOAA weather radio and it's working okay for you, you have it all set up, Kay Tyberg would like to know, what about when you're sleeping and you have your hearing aid or cochlear implant off? How are you going to be alerted to an emergency when you're sleeping? Okay,
so the weather radios that I was showing, and again, go to the website for NOAA and look specifically for weather radios on the NOAA site. There are some models that you can plug in either a tactile alert, so it'll be under your bed and it shakes as it goes on, or you can have one with visual, or you can have both. So if you wake up with a visual alert, then that's enough, that's fine, but you can plug in both the tactile and have the visual alert going off at the same time to wake you up as soon as it goes on. So now you don't have to keep your hearing aid on all night.
Okay, Kay also commented about the emergency kit. She thought maybe you should have a little more cash, maybe like $100, especially if you have a spouse or significant other with you. And a lot of water, maybe 3 gallons of water. And then if you're going to take all those canned goods, Lisa, you need to have a can opener and maybe a lighter. So I guess everybody's different in what they might pack in their emergency kit, but just be mindful of what you might need to open the cans of food or whatever else you have.
I think that's exactly right, that you need to make sure you don't use the electric can opener. Make sure it's a hand can opener. And make sure you put in what is important and what works for you. So if $20 is not quite enough and 20 doesn't go as far as it used to, that's for sure. So whatever it is that works for you, put that in your kit. Just think it through. I think that's the important thing about emergency preparedness, is that you're sitting there, you're saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I didn't even go into, and Scott can talk to this, if you have a family, if there's a fire, you can make plans so that everybody knows where to meet if there's a fire. You go, oh, okay, we're going to have a meeting place by the mailbox. Everybody goes there, so if I have to leave by one door and you have to leave by a different, I know that you're not left behind.
Oh, you should also be thinking about that in large-scale events like Katrina, 9/11. What if that Oroville Dam broke? All those folks that had been evacuated. We deal with that here also a lot of the times with forest fires. And you need to have, a lot of people work, so they're away from the house. Don't expect that you'll be able to make it back to the house. So have a central location away from the area itself. Relative's house, maybe in another county, that you can all meet up at. And have somebody also in a different location that you can contact, because their communication systems should be still functional, and you might be able to get a message through to them when you can't talk to each other. So have somebody that you can contact to give information to keep everybody up to date as to what's happening with you. The other thing that we deal with here in Flagstaff is snow, and I know a lot of you up on the East Coast also deal with snow quite frequently. So your emergency kits should also contain something that you're going to be able to stay warm in, because if something should happen, the electricity is going to go out. Then you have to think about, what does the electricity power? It powers all of your water pumps to get your water to your house. It takes care of all of the pumps for natural gas, so you're not going to have any natural gas for your heater. So things are going to get pretty cold in the wintertime, so you need to take that into consideration too.
Right, so I would add to that if in the winter I keep a blanket and a first aid kit in my car as well, in the trunk of my car. So I know if I'm stuck someplace, if I get in an accident or somebody else does, I could do something to help out myself or other people. So that's important. And Scott's right also about the bigger emergencies. I was living in New York City during 9/11, and my youngest son was in high school in uptown, and my other son was in a different borough across the river, and I could not get a hold of anyone. So it goes back to what Scott was saying about, well, actually I wasn't using a cell phone back then, but the landline phones were not getting through to anyone. I couldn't get a hold of school. So we really had to depend on the fact that I was circling back home, and everybody was walking too, so it took a long time for my son to get back downtown. But if at that point, if I'd known our backup plan, then I would have known, yes, this is what we know, this is who I contact to make sure my friends and family are safe.
It must have been really quite an experience, Lisa. I can't imagine. Okay, moving on to the next question. When you pack batteries in your pack, how long are they good for? Or if they're unopened, is there an expiration date on them, or how would you know when you need to replace them?
Okay, some batteries do have expiration dates on them. Some don't. I just bought a whole set of batteries that was expired just as I got it home. So what I would suggest is getting a battery tester so you can test them every so often, bring it out. You know, again, you should go through your kit and make sure it, you know, if you put crackers in that, that's not going to last forever. So when you check that, you can take your battery tester and see what shape your battery's in. Even if it does have an expiration date, you'll want to know.
And to answer the question about glow sticks, if you just Google glow sticks, you will find a lot of sites that have them very inexpensively. So shouldn't be a problem, or any kind of like novelty store have them.
A lot of
everywhere.
Nancy, a lot of the home improvement stores carry them now.
Yeah. Rosalind also said there's flashlights that don't need batteries. They run off a hand crank. I don't know that I've ever seen one of those, but that's a great idea in an emergency as well.
That's true. Actually, not only the batteries, the flashlight batteries you can shake, they're ones you crank. There's also a radio. Now this is one I have in the trunk of my car too, which is a hand-cranked FM AM radio, and it also has emergency flashes and cool stuff like that. So you can get that. The other thing, you can get cranks that'll crank up your cell phone if you ever connect it to that. So there's all kinds of emergency preparedness things that you can get if you take a look for them in a hardware store or go online, and you'll find a lot. Again, that what happens is there's always a run right after an emergency. But it'd be better to do it when things are calm.
Mm-hmm. Right. Can 911 communication dispatch handle high volume notification of emergencies like with Katrina or in the case of a tornado?
You want to take that one, Scott?
Sure. It always impresses me the call volume that they do handle, but when large events like that happen, it overwhelms their resources. They'll page out and they'll call out for all of their dispatchers to come in to man stations to handle the call volume. But we've seen it time and time again in Chicago, Florida with flooding and some fires. You end up being put on hold. So if you don't mind waiting, they'll eventually get to you. But for those first few days, your best to count on yourself in your preparations for it, at least for the first 3 days, until emergency services can group and get help over to you.
There's another thing that you can think about. There are community emergency response teams. These are people in the community, people in your neighbors that you can work with. You take a course and you learn about the things you can do to help out and the things that you shouldn't be doing. You should let the professionals take care of. But it helps, lets you see who your neighbors are. It helps the professionals have things. Everybody knows that you can't we don't have enough emergency responders for everybody in a large-scale emergency. So you should be able to take care of yourself. And if you have neighbors that are also doing the same thing, you'll know you'll have other people you can depend on too, and also help out. One emergency response team in my area, there was a possibility of a dam breaking locally. It's much smaller than the one in California. But people went door to door knocking on doors, and that was the community response team that pitched in to do that.
Okay. Is it still possible to buy a TTY or get a recycled one for the purpose of having it on hand in case you need it?
Okay, a lot of people have been ditching their TTYs. So you could first try in your state or a local, if you have a local nonprofit, they may be hanging on to a few to give away. You can go to your state's relay office or your state's telecommunication office, which might be also giving them away or at low cost, depending on your income. But you can actually go online to one of the big companies, Harris Communication, Teltec. They still sell some TTYs. You can get one.
Vicki in Colorado would like to know, the 25 markets, the major markets that you mentioned, Lisa, where can you find a list of those? And do they change when there's a fluctuation in population?
It's the top 25 markets, Nielsen-rated markets. So it's not population. Well, it's related to population, but what it is what is the outreach? And so yes, it does change. You should be able to find out from the FCC's website. You might be able to also look at Nielsen ratings. I could probably check into you if you really want to know. We can find out. And you can email me later. There's my email address right up on that slide. So I can look into it, but you might be able to just go to the FCC. It might be available right there.
Okay. Somebody said also Swiss Army knives are great to have in an emergency. I guess it was Kay that said that. Let's see. There was a question about hold on one second, about the batteries. There's a lot of comments now here that I think we've covered a lot of these concerning having fresh batteries for your hearing aids or cochlear implant on hand and in your emergency kit. Somebody asked if the PowerPoint will be available online. Yes, it will be posted along with the recording of the webinar. Rosalind said that there are some smoke alarms, for example, Nest, that will have visual and audible alarms and will send an alert to your smartphone. So technology's really come a long way, hasn't it? Be sure in your emergency kit that you also have some protein in there. That was a good suggestion, to have some peanuts or something like that, have some protein. What do you do if your TV is reporting the emergency and there are no captions?
Well, if there are no captions, I would immediately call the station, because in some cases it could be a technical problem. It could be that they didn't realize the captions were not playing. Because there is on every television, so every broadcaster and every cable provider must have a person who is in charge of captions. So in an emergency, I would just try to call the main number as quickly as possible to get through to them. But you might be able to, if your internet is still up and if you're accessing it, you could probably find a caption person who should respond to you pretty quickly if it's in the daytime. At night, it might be harder. but you should still try to call in directly. And then after the fact, if they haven't solved it in a reasonable amount of time, I would place a complaint with the FCC, because that should not happen. And there have been cases when it did not, and those stations that did not provide it were slapped pretty hard by the FCC.
That was a good question. Thank you for asking that, Deanna. Kay says, I'm a member of the CERT team, the CERT team, and even in this area in the Northeast, we don't know who the other CERTs are in the area. The course can be done online, and it's great. Do either of you know about that, that course and what it entails?
The one that we have here is managed by the county sheriff's department. They're the ones that put the training on. The way they do it here is, yes, it can be done online, but they do it on site. It's usually a day worth of training, and then the second day is they take the team out into the field and put into practice what they learned in the classroom. You learn a lot of different things: how to direct traffic, basic first aid, CPR, how to block a road safely if you need to provide protection for an accident or for patients. That's, you kind of get a behind-the-scenes look at how law enforcement, PD, fire departments, and emergency medical systems work. So it gives you a pretty good idea of what you can expect in different situations. We had a forest fire up here, up on the hill, or mountain, and one of the neighborhoods was completely evacuated, and they used the CERT team to come in and block the roads during that evacuation and monitor traffic coming in and out of that area. So they were extremely helpful. It allows the officers, it frees them up to do what they need to be doing. That's about as much as I know about the CERT program here.
Okay, I just want to also tell you about a chapter in South Carolina. They really did a lot of work with their local fire department to install smoke detectors in homes in their area. Dave Bitters, who's the president of that chapter, was aware that there was some deaf families in his area, and he made sure that the smoke detectors placed in homes, in those homes where the deaf people lived, had the visual alert as well. And he really worked hard to get that done. And lo and behold, the state caught wind of his hard work, and they approved, or I guess got a grant, so that they could provide that alert in homes where people had hearing loss all through the state. So that's quite a feather in his cap, although he won't, he doesn't want to take any credit for that. He just feels like it's the right thing to do. And I mention this because I think it's a really good thing for a chapter to take on. And if your chapter is looking for a project to do in the community, that might be a really useful thing to do. So Dave isn't in the webinar as far as I know tonight, but I'm just very impressed by the work he's done there. Okay, I don't see any other questions, Lisa and Scott. There's been some good conversation in the chat box about the Nest smoke alarm. So Rosalind, thank you for that really great suggestion and information. As I mentioned, the webinar is recorded, and we will post the recording along with the PowerPoint on our website It usually takes us about a week to 10 days to get that done. So look for it on there. And also, if I might just give a plug for next week's webinar, Chuck Conity from the Department of Labor has a very interesting presentation, and he's joined by a representative of the Job Accommodation Network. So please tune in for that. It's going to be a really good webinar. I'm quite excited about that. And it's taken several months to get it approved and posted. So please tune in for that. Let's see if I'll take one last look for any questions or comments here. I think we're all out of questions and comments. So again, thank you, Lisa Johnston, for providing CART captioning this evening. And thank you, Lisa and Scott, for presenting. That was very informative, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.